Hey guys, so today you and I are going to talk about if a computer science degree counts as an engineering degree. So let's get into it. So the question in question was posted on yet another one of my videos where I try to define my perspective of what an engineer is, and I can never ever find the right words to describe this in a way that doesn't piss somebody off or gets me into an argument with people about semantics and skills versus titles and all of that good stuff. And in this particular video, I tried to explain very simply that from my perspective, if you're going to use a title that is very well established, you should follow proper procedure before you use that title, because if you don't, you dilute the meaning of the title. Now, an example would be if you call yourself a doctor. Well, it's technically not your fault because for some reason society decided that, hey, you know what, let's confuse a lot of people so that they always have to trade a few more sentences whenever anybody says that they're a doctor. Because the first thing everybody's going to think about is a medical doctor, but there's more than one type of doctor. So instead of inventing a term that very specifically states that, hey, this is a doctor of medicine and this is a doctor of something else, we'll just use the same term and create a little bit of ambiguity because we don't have enough of that. An engineer is a very similar sort of thing. Today you have people who call themselves everything engineer: QA engineer, design engineer, software engineer, electrical engineer, so forth, civil engineer. There's a lot of engineering going on. And the thing is, this person was asking if, from my perspective, a computer science degree counts as having a proper engineering education. And here's the thing, I wrote back to this subscriber and I tried to explain, dude, do you think that I have the definition here in my lap, the objective definition of what it means to be an engineer? Of course not, because in the same video I explained that there is no license, as far as I know, not at least in my country, for being an engineer. There's a degree, there's courses, there's a lot of common denominators between different types of education where engineering is included and what you actually have to learn in order to sort of fit the role of an engineer, but there's no hard rules, and therefore you will have to figure out whether or not you are considered a engineer in your region based on a computer science degree, of course, by looking at what's the norm. What's the norm in your region? How do people define an engineer? Because the thing is, guys, it's, at least from my perspective, usually the way it goes is that we as people who want to define a profession, we have two types of definitions. You have a very strict definition with a license, or you don't. And the only difference between the two is that we have put a lot of effort into creating a very strict cutoff point for minimum amount of skill level in order to be called something. An example would be a doctor, a attorney or a lawyer or something like that, a psychiatrist. Well, not always. That's also a good one, because in some areas you can be a psychiatrist without actually having a license, and in some cases you're actually going to go to prison if you try to do that. And that's exactly my point. It depends on where you are. It depends on where you live. Like, how do you define something? I mean, you can go and become a full-fledged engineer by sitting in your garage and fiddling around with radios, computers, old electronics. You can learn all of it, and then you can have your computer next to you and learn from the internet, and you can get the exact same education. It's not a question of whether or not you will be someone who has that title or not, just because you know the same sort of stuff. It basically comes down to what is the definition in your region. That's what it comes down to. That's why we take the time to create licenses for specific roles where we really, 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 as a society, depend on that there is a very strict, well, I'm not going to say even that, because there are many, many different types of quality levels depending on what region you might find yourself in. Because let's be honest, if you're a policeman in one country and you're a policeman in another country, the amount of stuff that you might have to learn in order to become that thing might be very different. Same thing goes for doctors and so forth. It very much depends on where you find yourself, which I think that most people should be able to relate to, because I can promise you right here, right now, when there are medical professionals who come into to my country from different areas of the world, they still have to retake the qualification exams here. They're not just handed a spot at the hospital because we need to quality check them, just as we software developers needs to be quality checked before we get into a company. So what I want you to take away from this is that please, please, please let us just stop trying to define what an engineer is. I don't know why I went down this path. I boil it down to poor life choices and maybe one or two many spankings from my dad when I was a kid. But other than that, I can only get it down to bad life choices. And every time anybody asks me about what is an engineer, like what's a real engineer issue, like am I an engineer? Yeah, and I kind of just, I don't know if you're an engineer. Nobody can tell you if you're an engineer apart from maybe the other ones that are in your region, and then they're going to give you an example of, oh yeah, these are the things that most of us need to know in order to work in our part of the industry. And in some cases you might actually have a license that you need to acquire in order to be an engineer. I'm not saying that that's the case, but hey, if you don't want that license and there's no real law around you having to have something like that, then just learn the stuff that they recommend to you and then call yourself an engineer. I don't care. Call yourself an engineer at any point. I'm just stating that I think that it is sad to see that regardless of if it's an engineer, if it's a doctor, I mean, it's the same thing with chiropractor versus medical professional, or like security guard versus policeman. We can invent these ambiguous terms, and it usually, in my experience, favor the people who haven't gone through the same, like that don't actually measure up to the root of that term. That's those are the people that this favors. It's not very fun for the people who are policemen, doctors, lawyers, etc., or any type of person who has a much stricter set of requirements on them in order to attain that thing. And all it really does in many cases, apart from of course assist you, fooling a lot of very, very ignorant people who don't understand that it doesn't matter what your title is, it matters what you can do. If you lose your medical license, that doesn't mean that you're not a good doctor anymore, that you just forget everything. You just don't have a license anymore. You still have the skills. And the only time that really matters is if, hey, you're going to make some money for it from it, and you're going to start a practice or something like that. But I promise you, if we're stranded on an island and you lost your license and I'm dying from suffocation, I don't fucking care. Save my life. Have a great day.